There comes a moment when you realize you've been living someone else's life, not intentionally, not maliciously, but simply because you inherited a way of being that was never truly yours. You wake up one morning and recognize that the person looking back at you in the mirror is a stranger wearing your face. This isn't about failure or getting it wrong. This is about the sacred moment when your soul whispers, "It's time." Time to shed the skin that no longer fits. Time to let the old self die so the real you can finally breathe. To become born isn't about finding yourself. It's about allowing yourself to emerge from the cocoon of who you thought you had to be. The labor pains of spiritual birth are the contractions of letting go. I was Richard Alpert for 36 years. I had the Harvard professorship, the suburban house, the sports car, the whole carefully constructed identity of a successful academic. I thought I knew exactly who I was. The business card said so. The diplomas on the wall confirmed it. My mother was proud. My colleagues respected me. I was living the American dream, checking off all the boxes that society said would make me happy and whole. But here's what nobody tells you about wearing a mask for so long. Eventually, your face starts to conform to its shape. You begin to believe that the role you're playing is actually who you are. The persona becomes so convincing that you forget there's a real person underneath, gasping for air, dying to be seen. The first death always comes as a shock. One day you're cruising along in your well-ordered life, and the next something happens that cracks your carefully constructed world wide open. For me, it was a small white pill that dissolved not just in my mouth, but dissolved the boundaries of everything I thought I knew about reality. Suddenly, Richard Alpert, with all his credentials and certainties, began to crumble like a sand castle at high tide. This is the terror and the grace of spiritual awakening. The old self doesn't go gently into that good night. It fights, it screams, it throws every argument it can muster about why change is dangerous, why you should stay small, why the familiar prison is better than the unknown freedom. Your ego will tell you that this dissolution is death, and in a way, it's right. But what it doesn't understand is that this death is not an ending, it's a labor pain. The dying of who you thought you were is the first contraction of who you're meant to become. Every spiritual tradition speaks of this necessary death. The Christians call it being born again. The Buddhists speak of the dissolution of the ego. The Sufis talk about fana, the extinction of the false self. Different words, same sacred process. To become born, something must first die. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this death. They numb themselves with busyness, with substances, with endless distractions because somewhere deep down they sense that their carefully constructed identity is just that, a construction. But you can't build a house on shifting sand forever. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop working to alleviate suffering in the world. If anything, you become more active, more engaged, more committed to service. But your actions come from a different place now. They come from love rather than fear, from wisdom rather than reactivity, from a deep knowing of what's truly needed rather than from the compulsions of the ego. The eyes that see for the first time also see the humor in the whole cosmic joke. Here you've been, searching everywhere for what you already are, trying to become what you've always been, seeking to find what was never lost. It's like spending years looking for your glasses while they're sitting on your head. When you finally realize what's been happening, you can't help but laugh. This laughter isn't cynical or bitter. It's the laughter of recognition, of homecoming, of finally getting the punchline of existence. It's the laughter that comes when you realize that the whole spiritual journey has been about returning to the simplicity and innocence you had before you learned to see yourself as separate, broken, or incomplete. But even as you laugh at the cosmic joke, you also feel a deep tenderness for all the beings who are still searching, still struggling, still believing they need to become something other than what they are. You remember what it was like to be lost in that maze of seeking, and your heart opens with compassion for anyone who's still wandering in the wilderness of becoming. With your new eyes, you see that everyone is already enlightened. They just don't know it yet. Everyone is already whole. They just haven't remembered. Everyone is already home. They just haven't noticed. Your job isn't to convince them of this truth, but to embody it so completely that your very presence reminds them of who they really are. Now comes the delicate art of learning to walk in this new world with these new eyes, this new understanding, this new way of being. It's like learning to walk all over again, but this time you're not just learning to move your body through space. You're learning to move your consciousness through reality in a completely different way. The first steps are tentative, uncertain. You're not sure how to navigate relationships when you can see through the personas people are presenting. You're not sure how to engage in conversations about problems when you can see that most problems are just stories we tell ourselves. You're not sure how to participate in a world that seems to be based on illusions when you can see the truth underneath. There's a temptation to withdraw, to become the detached observer, to float above the human drama rather than engage with it. But this would be missing the point. The goal isn't to transcend the human experience, it's to bring your awakened consciousness into the midst of it. It's to learn how to be both human and divine, both personal and impersonal, both engaged and detached. This requires developing what I call spiritual stamina, the ability to stay present and aware even when the world around you is caught up in unconsciousness. It means learning to respond rather than react, to speak truth without being harsh, to love without being possessive, to serve without being attached to results. You also have to learn to trust your inner guidance in a way you never have before. The old rules don't apply anymore. You can't just follow the conventional wisdom or do what everyone else is doing. You have to learn to listen to the still small voice within, to trust the intelligence of your heart, to follow the path that's uniquely yours even when no one else understands it. This walking in wonder requires a kind of courage that most people never develop. It's the courage to be authentic in a world that rewards conformity, to be vulnerable in a world that equates vulnerability with weakness, to be loving in a world that often seems to punish love. It's the courage to keep your heart open even when it's been broken, to keep trusting even when you've been betrayed, to keep serving even when your efforts seem to make no difference. But as you take these first steps, you discover that you're not walking alone. There's an intelligence guiding your steps, a love supporting your journey, a wisdom informing your choices. You're part of something much larger than yourself, and that something is taking care of you in ways you're only beginning to understand. The wonder isn't just in the big mystical experiences, it's in the ordinary moments that have been transformed by your new way of seeing. It's in the way sunlight falls across your kitchen table, in the smile of a child, in the texture of your morning coffee, in the simple miracle of breath entering and leaving your body. You begin to understand that every moment is a teaching, every interaction is a communion, every breath is a prayer. The sacred isn't something you have to find or create. It's already here, already present, already available. You just had to learn how to see it. As you walk in wonder, you also discover that you're not trying to get somewhere anymore. The journey itself has become the destination. The process of walking has become more important than where you're going. You're not rushing towards some future state of perfection. You're fully present to the perfection that's already here. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning or evolving, but your growth comes from a different place now. It comes from curiosity rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear, from the natural unfolding of your being rather than from the desperate effort to become something you're not. The wonder also extends to your relationship with uncertainty, where once you needed to know what was going to happen, now you're content to be surprised. Where once you needed to be in control, now you're willing to be guided. Where once you needed to have all the answers, now you're comfortable living in the questions. This is the paradox of spiritual maturity. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The more you understand, the more mysterious life becomes. The more you awakened, the more you appreciate the beauty of not knowing what's going to happen next. And so you walk, one step at a time, into the great mystery of existence, no longer trying to solve it or master it or escape from it, but simply marveling at the incredible gift of being alive, awake, and aware in this moment, in this body, in this world that is both utterly ordinary and completely miraculous. As you continue walking in this new landscape of consciousness, you quickly realize that the old ways of communicating no longer serve you. The language you used to speak, the language of the ego, of complaint and comparison, of judgment and justification, feels foreign on your tongue now. It's like trying to speak a language you learned as a child but haven't used in years. The words are there, but they no longer carry the weight of truth. You discover that your newly born self needs a new language, a way of speaking that comes from the heart rather than from the head, from presence rather than from personality, from love rather than from fear. This is the language of the heart, and it's unlike anything you've ever learned in school or picked up from books. It's a language that must be remembered rather than learned, felt rather than thought, embodied rather than intellectualized. The first thing you notice about this new language is its simplicity, where once you might have used complicated explanations, elaborate justifications, or sophisticated arguments, you now find yourself speaking with startling directness. The truth, when it comes from the heart, doesn't need to be dressed up or defended. It simply is. And when you speak it, people recognize it immediately, even if they don't understand it intellectually. This heart language is also incredibly spacious. There's room in it for paradox, for mystery, for the kind of truths that can't be captured in logical propositions. You can say things like, I love you and I need space, or I'm completely certain and totally confused, or I'm perfectly content and deeply longing. And somehow these apparent contradictions make perfect sense. The heart can hold multiple truths simultaneously in a way that the mind never could. But learning to speak this new language is challenging because it requires a level of vulnerability that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. When you speak from the heart, you can't hide behind roles or personas or carefully constructed images. You have to show up as you really are, with all your uncertainty, all your tenderness, all your humanness on full display. This can be terrifying, especially in a world that often punishes authenticity. The language of the heart also requires you to let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Some people will resonate with your truth, others won't. Some will be threatened by your authenticity, others will be inspired by it. You have to learn to speak your truth regardless of how it's received, not because you don't care about others, but because you care too much to offer them anything less than what's real. This new way of communicating also transforms your relationship with silence. You discover that sometimes the most profound communication happens without words at all. A look, a touch, a shared moment of presence can convey more than hours of conversation. You learn to trust the silence between words, to let your presence speak as loudly as your voice. The heart language is also deeply compassionate. When you speak from this place, you're not trying to prove a point or win an argument or make someone wrong. You're simply offering your truth as a gift with no attachment to how it's received. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop advocating for what you believe in. It means you can engage in difficult conversations with an open heart, seeking understanding rather than victory. As you become more fluent in this language, you also become a better listener. You learn to listen not just to people's words, but to what's underneath the words, the pain, the fear, the longing, the love that's often hidden beneath the surface of ordinary conversation. You develop the ability to hear the heart speaking even when the mouth is saying something entirely different. This heart language also changes how you relate to yourself. The harsh inner critic that once dominated your internal dialogue begins to quiet. You start speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a beloved friend, with kindness, with understanding, with forgiveness. The conversation in your head becomes a dialogue of love rather than a monologue of judgment. You also discover that the language of the heart is universal. Regardless of culture, religion, or background, people recognize truth when they hear it. Love speaks the same language everywhere. Compassion needs no translation. Presence communicates across all barriers. When you speak from this place, you're speaking the original language of the soul, the language that all beings understand at the deepest level. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this new language is its power to heal. When you speak from the heart, you create a space where others can do the same. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. Your vulnerability invites others to be vulnerable. Your presence calls forth the presence in others. You become a tuning fork for truth, helping others remember their own capacity for authentic communication. The language of the heart is also the language of service. When you speak from this place, you're not just communicating information, you're offering medicine. Your words become vehicles for healing, for awakening, for love. You discover that you can't use this language selfishly because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the heart of the universe, and you're simply a conduit for its expression. Just as a newborn needs nourishment to grow and thrive, your newly born consciousness needs specific kinds of sustenance to continue developing. The old food, the constant stimulation, the endless distractions, the mental junk food of worry and gossip and complaint no longer satisfies. In fact, it makes you feel sick. Your new soul craves different nourishment, and learning to provide it becomes essential for your continued growth. The first food your new soul needs is silence, not the silence of withdrawal or avoidance, but the rich, fertile silence of presence. This is where you go to remember who you are, to connect with the source of your being, to drink from the well of infinite awareness. Without regular doses of this silence, you begin to feel spiritually malnourished, disconnected from your center, caught up in the surface waves of life rather than resting in the deep current. But this silence isn't passive. It's an active practice of letting go, of releasing the constant mental chatter that wants to pull you back into the old patterns of thinking and being. It's a practice of coming home to yourself again and again until this homecoming becomes as natural as breathing. Your new soul also needs beauty, not just the obvious beauty of sunsets and flowers, but the subtle beauty that's present in every moment when you have eyes to see it. The way light falls across a wall, the sound of rain on the roof, the expression on a stranger's face. When you're feeding your soul with beauty, you're feeding it with the visible manifestation of the divine. This hunger for beauty isn't aesthetic, it's spiritual. Beauty is one of the ways the soul recognizes truth. When you see something truly beautiful, something in you says yes at a level deeper than thought. Your new soul needs this yes, the way a plant needs sunlight. It needs regular reminders of the magnificence of existence, the artistry of creation, the incredible creativity of consciousness expressing itself in form. Truth is another essential nutrient for your new soul. Not the kind of truth that comes from books or teachers or authorities, but the truth that emerges from your own direct experience. Your soul needs you to trust your own knowing, to honor your own insights, to value your own relationship with reality. This means learning to distinguish between what you know because someone told you and what you know because you've experienced it yourself. This feeding on true. It also means being honest with yourself about where you are in your journey. Not pretending to be more awakened than you are, not spiritual bypassing difficult emotions, not trying to live up to some image of how an enlightened person should behave. Your soul needs the nourishment of radical honesty, the kind that sees clearly without judgment, that acknowledges what is without trying to make it different. Service is another form of nourishment for your new soul. But this isn't service as duty or obligation, it's service as love in action. When you serve from this place, you're not depleting yourself, you're actually feeding yourself. You're connecting with the part of you that's larger than your personal concerns, the part that's intimately connected with all of life. This service can take many forms. Sometimes it's as simple as listening deeply to someone who needs to be heard. Sometimes it's offering a word of encouragement to someone who's struggling. Sometimes it's doing your work with such presence and care that it becomes a form of worship. The key is that it comes from overflow rather than from emptiness, from love rather than from guilt. Your new soul also needs community, not just any community, but the kind of community that supports your authenticity rather than demanding that you conform. This might be a spiritual group, a circle of conscious friends, or even just one person who truly sees you and accepts you as you are. Without this kind of community, it's easy to start doubting your own experience, to wonder if you're making it all up, to feel isolated in your journey. But finding this community often requires letting go of old relationships that no longer serve your growth. This can be painful, but it's necessary. You can't keep feeding your soul with the same food that kept you spiritually malnourished. Sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from people and situations that drag you back into unconsciousness, even if they're familiar and comfortable. Nature is another essential nutrient for your new soul. There's something about being in the natural world that reminds you of your own true nature. The trees don't struggle to be trees, the birds don't worry about being birds, the rivers don't question their flow. Being in nature helps you remember the effortlessness of being, the naturalness of your own authentic expression. This connection with nature doesn't have to be dramatic or exotic. It can be as simple as feeling the earth beneath your feet, watching clouds move across the sky, or noticing the way plants grow toward the light. The key is presence, attention, the willingness to let the natural world teach you about the rhythms and cycles of existence. Your new soul also needs practices that help you stay connected to your center throughout the day. These might be traditional practices like meditation or prayer, or they might be more personal rituals that you create for yourself. The important thing is that they serve as anchors, reminders, ways of returning to yourself when you get caught up in the busyness of life. But perhaps the most important nourishment for your new soul is the practice of self-compassion, learning to treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a dear friend, the same understanding you would offer someone who's struggling, the same forgiveness you would extend to someone who's made a mistake. Without this self-compassion, all the other practices in the world won't be enough to sustain your growth. As you learn to feed your new soul with these various forms of nourishment, you begin to notice that you're not just growing, you're glowing. There's a quality of aliveness, of presence, of joy that begins to emanate from you. People notice. They may not be able to put their finger on what's different, but they can feel it. You become a source of nourishment for others, not because you're trying to, but because you're so well fed yourself that you naturally overflow. The most profound realization of your rebirth is that it was never just about you. Your transformation, your awakening, your journey from the old self to the new self, it's all part of something much larger than your personal evolution. You begin to understand that your rebirth is actually a gift to the world, a contribution to the collective awakening of consciousness on this planet. This understanding doesn't come from the ego, with its need to feel important or special. It comes from a deep recognition of the interconnectedness of all life. When you heal, everyone heals a little bit. When you wake up, everyone becomes a little more awake. When you embody love, the amount of love in the world increases. Your individual transformation ripples out in ways you can't even begin to imagine. You realize that every step of your journey, the pain, the confusion, the struggle, the breakthrough, has been preparing you to serve. Not in some grandiose way, but in the most natural way possible, by being who you really are. Your authenticity becomes a beacon for others who are still lost in their own false identities. Your presence becomes a reminder to others of their own possibility for transformation. This doesn't mean you become a teacher or a guru or a spiritual leader, though you might. It means you become a living example of what's possible when a human being stops running from their own truth and starts running toward it. You become proof that transformation is possible, that people can change, that there's hope for anyone who's willing to do the work of becoming born. The gift of your rebirth is also the gift of your perspective. Having been both asleep and awake, having lived both unconsciously and consciously, you have a unique understanding of the journey of awakening. You know what it's like to be lost, so you can meet others in their lostness without judgment. You know what it's like to be found, so you can point others toward their own discovery. Your rebirth also gives you a deep appreciation for the perfection of everyone's journey, even when it doesn't look perfect from the outside. You understand that everyone is exactly where they need to be, learning exactly what they need to learn, experiencing exactly what they need to experience for their own awakening. This doesn't make you passive or uncaring. It makes you more compassionate, more patient, more trusting of the process. You also begin to see that your rebirth is part of a larger pattern, a collective movement toward greater consciousness that's happening all over the planet. You're not alone in your transformation. Millions of people are waking up, growing up, opening up to their true nature. Your rebirth is both utterly personal and completely universal, both unique to you and part of the great awakening of humanity. This understanding brings with it a sense of responsibility, but not the heavy, burdensome kind of responsibility that comes from guilt or obligation. It's the light, joyful responsibility that comes from recognizing your part in the grand symphony of existence. You're not responsible for everyone else's awakening, but you are responsible for your own continued growth and for sharing the gifts that have been given to you. The gift of your rebirth is also the gift of your love. The love that has been awakened in you through your transformation isn't just for you, it's for everyone. It's the love that sees through appearances to the truth that lives in every heart. It's the love that remembers the innocence and beauty of every soul, even when it's hidden beneath layers of conditioning and pain. This love doesn't discriminate. It doesn't choose favorites or play politics. It simply loves because that's its nature, the way the sun simply shines because that's what it does. Your rebirth has connected you to this source of unconditional love, and now you get to be a conduit for it in the world. But perhaps the greatest gift of your rebirth is the gift of your presence, not your physical presence, though that's important, but your conscious presence. The quality of awareness that you bring to every interaction, every situation, every moment. This presence is healing in itself. It doesn't need to do anything or say anything. It simply needs to be present, and that presence touches something deep in everyone you encounter. Your rebirth also gives you the gift of fearlessness, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to feel fear and act from love anyway. Having died to your old self and been born into your new self, you know that there's nothing that can ultimately harm you. Your true nature is indestructible, eternal, infinite. This knowledge gives you the courage to love more fully, to risk more completely, to serve more openly. The gift of your rebirth extends even to future generations. The consciousness you've awakened, the love you've embodied, the truth you've realized, all of this becomes part of the morphic field of human consciousness. It makes it easier for others to awaken, easier for children to be born into consciousness, easier for the collective evolution of humanity to continue. You begin to understand that your rebirth is not an ending but a beginning. It's not a destination but a doorway. It's not a personal achievement but a gift to be shared. The more you give it away, the more it grows. The more you share it, the more it multiplies. The more you embody it, the more it transforms the world around you. And so you walk forward into your new life, not with the swagger of someone who has figured it all out, but with the humility of someone who knows that the journey is just beginning. You carry the gift of your rebirth lightly, offering it freely to anyone who's ready to receive it, trusting that the same intelligence that orchestrated your transformation is orchestrating the transformation of all life. So here we are, at the end of this particular telling of the story, but really at the beginning of everything that matters. You see, becoming born isn't something that happens once and then you're done. It's something that happens over and over again, each time you're willing to let go of who you thought you were and allow who you really are to emerge. The beautiful thing is that once you've been through this process once, you begin to recognize it when it wants to happen again. You start to welcome the signs of impending transformation rather than resist them. You begin to trust the process of death and rebirth as the natural rhythm of spiritual growth. And you realize that this whole journey, from the first crack in your carefully constructed identity to the full flowering of your authentic self, is happening not just to you, but as you. You're not a separate being having a spiritual experience. You're the universe experiencing itself through the particular lens of your consciousness, your life itself, waking up to its own infinite nature. This is the ultimate gift of becoming born. You discover that you were never really born and you never really die. You're the eternal consciousness that plays at being temporary, the infinite awareness that pretends to be limited, the unchanging presence that dances as constant change. So whether you're just beginning to feel the first stirrings of transformation, or you're deep in the middle of a spiritual death, or you're taking your first steps as a newly born being, remember this: you're not alone, you're not broken, you're not behind schedule, you're exactly where you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, becoming exactly who you need to become. The universe is conspiring to wake you up, to free you, to love you back to yourself. Trust the process. Surrender to the intelligence that's orchestrating your transformation. And remember, we're all just walking each other home. Welcome to your new life. Welcome to who you've always been. Welcome to the endless adventure of becoming born again and again into the truth of your infinite nature. The journey continues. The love remains. The birth never ends. Eventually, the foundation cracks and you have to choose. Rebuild the same fragile structure or let it collapse and see what emerges from the rubble. When I returned from India, people would ask me what happened to Richard Alpert. They wanted to know where he went, as if he had simply vanished one day. The truth is, he didn't go anywhere. He was never really there to begin with. What died was the illusion that he was the totality of who I am. What was born was Ram Dass, not as another identity to cling to, but as a doorway to something infinitely more vast and real. The first death is not a one-time event. It's a process, a slow unwrapping of the layers of conditioning that have accumulated over a lifetime. Each layer that falls away can feel like a small death. A tiny grief for the familiar way of being that's being left behind. You might mourn the loss of your old certainties, your old ways of making sense of the world. This mourning is natural and necessary. Honor it. Let yourself feel the tenderness of letting go. But here's the beautiful paradox. The more you die to who you thought you were, the more alive you become to who you really are. The death of the false self is the birth of the true self. The question isn't whether you're ready for this death, it's whether you're ready to stop running from it. Because ready or not, if you're hearing these words, if something in your soul is stirring in recognition, your time has come. The first death is already beginning. After the first death comes the most uncomfortable part of the journey, the space between spaces, the pause between breaths, the eternal moment when you're no longer who you were but not yet who you're becoming. This is the womb of uncertainty, and it's where most people turn back. They feel the groundlessness and panic. They reach for the familiar even if it no longer fits, because anything feels better than floating in the unknown. I spent months in this liminal space after my first trip to India. I had tasted something beyond Richard Alpert, but I hadn't yet found my footing in this new way of being. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The old world no longer made sense, but the new one hadn't yet taken shape. I was suspended between two realities, belonging fully to neither. This is the most sacred and terrifying part of spiritual rebirth. You're in the cosmic womb, floating in the amniotic fluid of pure possibility. Everything is potential, nothing is fixed. The ego hates this space because it can't control it, can't predict it, can't make it safe. But the soul knows this is where the real magic happens. This is where you're being formed, not by your plans or your efforts, but by something far more intelligent and loving than your conscious mind. In this space, you learn to breathe underwater. You discover that uncertainty isn't the enemy of faith, it's the birthplace of faith. When you have no solid ground to stand on, you learn to trust the process itself. You begin to understand that not knowing is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The womb of uncertainty teaches you patience in a way that nothing else can. You can't rush a birth, you can't force a flower to bloom or a butterfly to emerge from its cocoon. There's a natural timing to transformation that your anxious mind will never understand. But your soul knows this timing intimately. It knows when to contract and when to expand, when to hold on and when to let go. During this time, you might feel like you're losing your mind, and in a way, you are. You're losing the old mind, the conditioned mind, the mind that thought it knew how life was supposed to unfold. This can be deeply disorienting. Friends and family might not understand what's happening to you. You might not understand what's happening to you. The old reference points are gone, but the new ones haven't yet appeared. This is when you learn to trust the darkness, not the darkness of despair, but the darkness of gestation. Seeds grow in the dark, babies develop in the darkness of the womb, stars are born in the darkness of space. There's a creative, generative darkness that's different from the darkness of depression or fear. Learning to tell the difference is crucial. The womb of uncertainty is also where you learn to surrender at the deepest level. You realize that you're not in charge of this process. You can't micromanage your own rebirth. You can't schedule your enlightenment or plan your awakening. All you can do is show up, breathe, and trust that whatever is trying to be born through you knows what it's doing. This requires a level of faith that the mind finds almost impossible to accept. The mind wants guarantees, timelines, progress reports. But the soul speaks a different language. It communicates through intuition, through dreams, through the subtle stirrings of the heart. You learn to listen with different ears, to see with different eyes, to feel with a sensitivity you never knew you possessed. People often ask me how long this stage lasts. How do you know when you're ready to emerge? The truth is, it's different for everyone. Some people gestate for months, others for years. Some have multiple births, multiple deaths, and rebirths throughout their lives. There's no standard timeline for the soul's journey, but there are signs, subtle shifts in the inner landscape that signal readiness. You know you're ready to emerge when the uncertainty stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like home. When you can rest in not knowing without constantly trying to figure it out. When you begin to sense something stirring in the depths of your being, something that wants to be born but doesn't yet have a name. The greatest gift of the womb of uncertainty is that it teaches you to trust the process of becoming. You learn that you don't have to have it all figured out to take the next step. You don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. You just have to be willing to gestate in the mystery, to let yourself be formed by forces far more wise and loving than your small self could ever understand. And then, when the time is right, when the soul is ready, the real contractions begin. The pain that will push you into your new life. The pain that will become your greatest teacher and your most compassionate guide. The pain that will midwife your rebirth. There's a particular kind of pain that comes with becoming born. Not the pain of injury or illness, but the pain of expansion. It's the pain of a heart cracking open, of consciousness stretching beyond its familiar boundaries, of love growing so large it can no longer be contained in the small chambers of the ego. This pain is your midwife, and like all midwives, it knows exactly what it's doing. Most of us have been taught to avoid pain at all costs. We medicate it, distract ourselves from it, run from it as if it were the enemy. But there's a difference between the pain that destroys and the pain that transforms. The pain that destroys contracts you, makes you smaller, builds walls around your heart. The pain that transforms expands you, cracks you open, and lets the light in. When I was going through my own rebirth, the pain was excruciating. Not just emotional pain, but a deep, soul-level ache that felt like my entire being was being turned inside out. I had to let go of everything I thought I knew about myself, about life, about what it meant to be human. Each release felt like a small death, and in a way, it was. But here's what I learned. The pain wasn't happening to me, it was happening for me. Every contraction was moving me closer to who I really was. Every moment of discomfort was clearing away another layer of conditioning, another false belief, another way of being that was too small for the truth trying to emerge. The most intense pain often comes when we're asked to let go of our most cherished illusions, the story of who we think we are, the roles we've played, the identities we've constructed. The ego doesn't give up its territory easily. It will fight to maintain its supremacy, creating drama, manufacturing crises, doing whatever it takes to keep you focused on the small self instead of the vast self that's trying to be born. This is why spiritual teachers throughout history have spoken of the dark night of the soul. It's not a failure of faith or a sign that you're going the wrong way. It's the natural resistance that comes when the soul is ready to expand, but the ego is still in control. The pain is the friction between these two forces, the force that wants to keep you small and the force that wants to set you free. I remember lying in my bed in India, burning with fever, not sure if I was dying or being born. My body was racked with pain, my mind was filled with confusion, and my heart felt like it was being torn open. But somewhere in the depths of that experience, I began to understand that this wasn't random suffering. This was purposeful pain. This was the pain of transformation. The midwife of suffering doesn't just bring physical or emotional pain. Sometimes it brings the pain of disillusionment, the painful recognition that the life you've been living isn't authentic, that the relationships you've built are based on false pretenses, that the goals you've been chasing are empty. This can be devastating, but it's also liberating. You can't build a genuine life on a foundation of lies, even lies you've told yourself. Sometimes the pain comes through loss, the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the collapse of a dream. These losses can feel like they're destroying you, but they're actually composting you. They're breaking down the old form so that something new can grow. The pain is the decomposition process, and like all decomposition, it's messy and it smells and it takes time. But here's the miracle. If you can stay present with the pain instead of running from it, if you can let it move through you instead of getting stuck in it, it will transform you. It will burn away everything that isn't essential, everything that isn't love, everything that isn't real. What remains is pure gold, the indestructible essence of who you really are. The midwife of suffering teaches you compassion in a way that nothing else can. When you've been broken open by pain, when you've been humbled by loss, when you've been stripped down to your essential self, you develop a tenderness toward all beings who are struggling. You recognize that everyone you meet is carrying some kind of pain, fighting some kind of battle, trying to find their way home to themselves. This compassion isn't just a nice spiritual concept, it's a practical tool for navigating the birth process. When you can meet your own pain with compassion instead of resistance, when you can hold your own suffering with tenderness instead of judgment, the pain begins to transform. It stops being something that's happening to you and becomes something that's happening through you. The final lesson of the midwife of suffering is this: the pain that breaks you open is the same pain that births you. The heart that's been shattered by loss is the same heart that can hold the whole world. The soul that's been humbled by failure is the same soul that can touch the infinite. The pain doesn't go away, it transforms. It becomes a doorway instead of a wall, a bridge instead of a barrier. When you finally understand that your pain is your teacher, your suffering is your guru, your brokenness is your strength, you stop being a victim of your experience and start being a student of it. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this here to teach me? This shift in perspective is the difference between being destroyed by your pain and being transformed by it. The contractions are getting stronger now. The old self is dissolving more rapidly. The new self is pressing against the boundaries of the known world, ready to emerge. The midwife of suffering has done her work. The time of birth is near. The moment comes when you realize you can't squeeze into your old skin anymore. It's like trying to fit into clothes you wore as a child. Not just uncomfortable, but impossible. The fabric of who you used to be has become too tight, too restricting, too suffocating for the expanded being you're becoming. This is when the real work begins, the conscious, intentional shedding of everything that no longer serves your emerging self. But here's what's tricky about shedding old skin. It's not just about changing your external circumstances. It's about releasing the internal structures that have been holding you in place. The beliefs about who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve, what's possible for your life. These beliefs are like invisible threads that keep you tethered to your old identity, even when every fiber of your being is screaming for freedom. I had to let go of being the Harvard professor, but that was just the beginning. I had to release the belief that my worth was tied to my academic achievements. I had to shed the idea that intelligence meant having all the answers. I had to peel away the conviction that being responsible meant being in control. Layer by layer, belief by belief, I had to consciously choose to let go of the internal architecture that had been defining my reality. This process isn't linear or neat. You don't just decide one day to shed your old skin and then it happens. It's more like a snake shedding. Sometimes you get stuck halfway, with part of you still trapped in the old form and part of you trying to emerge. You have to be patient with yourself during these in-between times when you're neither fully who you were nor fully who you're becoming. The hardest part is that you have to shed these layers while still living your life. You can't just retreat to a cave somewhere and emerge transformed. You have to show up for work, maintain relationships, pay bills, all while undergoing this fundamental identity shift. It's like trying to change the engine of a car while driving down the highway. This is where practice becomes crucial, not just meditation or yoga, though those can be helpful, but the practice of conscious awareness throughout your daily life. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to catch yourself slipping back into old patterns. Every conversation is a chance to speak from your emerging self instead of your conditioned self. Every decision is a choice between the old skin and the new. Sometimes you have to actively resist them. A pull of the familiar. Your old friends might not understand the person you're becoming. Your family might pressure you to go back to who you were. Your own mind might try to convince you that this whole transformation thing is just a phase, that you should return to the safety of the known. But once you've tasted the freedom of authentic being, there's no going back. The old skin will never fit again. The shedding process also involves releasing the stories you've been telling yourself about your limitations. The story that you're not creative, not spiritual, not worthy of love, not capable of change. These stories are like old clothes that you've been wearing for so long you've forgotten they're not actually part of your body. When you shed them, you realize they were never true in the first place. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of shedding old skin is releasing the need for other people's approval of who you're becoming. The old you was probably well-liked, or at least predictable. People knew what to expect from you. The new you might be threatening to those who benefited from your old patterns. You might lose relationships. You might disappoint people. You might be misunderstood. This is part of the process, and it's painful, but it's also necessary. What helps during this time is remembering that you're not actually losing anything real. You're only releasing what was never truly yours to begin with. The roles you played, the masks you wore, the limited version of yourself you presented to the world, these were all borrowed clothes. Underneath, your essential self has always been intact, just waiting for the courage to emerge. The shedding creates space for something new to emerge. It's like cleaning out a closet that's been stuffed with clothes you never wear. Suddenly there's room for something beautiful, something that actually fits who you are now. But you have to be willing to let go of the old to make room for the new. You have to trust that what's emerging is more authentic than what you're releasing. As the old skin falls away, you begin to glimpse something extraordinary, a moment of pure presence, a breath that exists outside of time, a pause in the constant becoming where you simply are. This is the most sacred space in the journey of rebirth, the eye of the hurricane where all is still and clear. Between the exhale of who you were and the inhale of who you're becoming, there's a moment of perfect suspension. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, not falling but not on solid ground either. This is the breath between breaths, the space between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats where the infinite resides. Most people rush through this space because it feels like nothing is happening. We're so addicted to movement, to progress, to constantly becoming something more that we miss the profound fullness of simply being. But this space is where the real magic happens. This is where you discover that you were never broken and never needed fixing. This is where you meet yourself as you really are, before all the stories, before all the conditioning, before all the endless effort to become. In this space, the time doesn't exist in the way we usually understand it. Past and future collapse into an eternal now. The urgency that usually drives your life dissolves. The anxiety about what's next, the regret about what's past, the constant mental chatter about how things should be different, all of it falls away, and you're left with pure presence. This is where you learn the difference between being and doing. Most of your life has been spent in the realm of doing, accomplishing, achieving, becoming, improving, fixing, changing. But in the breath between breaths, you discover the realm of being, where nothing needs to be done, nothing needs to be changed, nothing needs to be improved. You are already complete, already whole, already perfect as you are. The paradox is that this space of pure being is also the space of infinite possibility. When you're not trying to become anything specific, when you're not forcing life to conform to your expectations, you become available to possibilities you never could have imagined. It's like clearing your schedule completely and then discovering opportunities you never would have noticed when you were rushing from one appointment to the next. In this space, you also discover that you're not separate from the breath. You are the breath. You're not experiencing the pause. You are the pause. The observer and the observed merge into one seamless experience. This is where the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, where you start to understand that the boundaries between self and other, between inner and outer, between sacred and mundane, are just constructs of the mind. But here's what's challenging about this space. Your mind will try to capture it, to understand it, to make it into another experience you can file away and reference later. The ego will want to claim it, to make it special, to turn it into another achievement. But the moment you try to grasp it, it's gone. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. This is why presence is a practice, not a destination. You can't arrive at the breath between breaths and set up camp there. You can only visit it, Again and again, learning to recognize it, learning to trust it, learning to let it transform you without trying to control it. The breath between breaths is also where you begin to understand the nature of surrender. Not the kind of surrender that gives up or gives in, but the kind that gives over. You give over control to something larger than your individual will. You give over the need to understand everything intellectually. You give over the compulsion to make things happen according to your timeline. This surrender isn't passive, it's the most active thing you can do. It takes tremendous courage to let go of the illusion of control, to trust that the intelligence that beats your heart and grows your fingernails might also know how to guide your life. It takes faith to believe that the same force that turns acorns into oak trees might also know how to turn you into who you're meant to be. In the breath between breaths, you also discover that you're not breathing, you're being breathed. Life is living itself through you. Consciousness is experiencing itself as you. This realization is both humbling and liberating. Humbling because it means you're not the author of your own story. Liberating because it means you don't have to carry the weight of making everything happen. As you learn to rest in this space more often, you begin to carry its quality into your daily life. You become less reactive, more responsive. You become less anxious about the future, more present to what's happening now. You become less identified with your thoughts and emotions, more aware of the spacious awareness in which they arise and pass away. The breath between breaths becomes your home base, the place you return to when life gets overwhelming, when the old patterns start to reassert themselves, when you forget who you really are. It's always there, waiting for you, as close as your next breath, as immediate as this moment. And then, as you emerge from this sacred pause, something extraordinary happens. You open your eyes and the world looks different. Not because the world has changed, but because you're seeing it for the first time with eyes that are truly awake. The first thing you notice is how alive everything is. The tree outside your window isn't just a tree anymore, it's a living being, breathing, growing, reaching toward the light with an intelligence that takes your breath away. The face of a stranger isn't just a face, it's a universe of experience, a story of joy and sorrow, a mirror reflecting your own soul back to you. Colors seem more vibrant, sounds more layered, textures more intricate. It's as if someone has removed a film from your eyes that you didn't even know was there. The world you thought you knew reveals itself to be infinitely more mysterious, more beautiful, more sacred than you ever imagined. But it's not just the external world that looks different. When you look in the mirror, you see eyes that you recognize, but that seem to belong to someone both familiar and completely new. There's a depth there that wasn't there before, a quality of presence that speaks of journeys taken and territories explored that can't be found on any map. This new seeing isn't just visual, it's a complete shift in perception. You begin to see the interconnectedness of all things, the invisible threads that weave everything together into one seamless tapestry. You see how your joy affects the joy of others, how your pain touches the pain of the world, how your healing contributes to the healing of the whole. You also begin to see through the stories that once seemed so real and important, the drama of your personal history, the urgency of your goals and desires, the solid reality of your problems and challenges. All of these begin to look like elaborate games of make-believe. Not unreal, but not as real as you once thought, like dreams that you believed were waking life. This seeing can be disorienting at first. You might feel like you're watching your life from a distance, like you're an actor who's suddenly become aware that you're on a stage. The roles you've been playing, the lies you've been reciting, the costumes you've been wearing, all of it suddenly seems both perfectly natural and completely arbitrary. But there's also a tremendous freedom in this new seeing. When you realize that most of what you've been taking so seriously is just a play, You can begin to play your part with more lightness, more humor, more love. You can commit fully to your role without being trapped by it. You can care deeply without being attached to outcomes. This is when you begin to understand what the mystics meant when they spoke of the world as illusion. They weren't saying that nothing matters or that life is meaningless. They were pointing to the difference between the relative reality of forms and names and stories and the absolute reality of the consciousness that perceives it all. Both are real, but they're real in different ways. With these new eyes, you also begin to see the perfection in everything, even in what previously looked like mistakes or failures or tragedies. You see how every experience, even the most painful ones, has contributed to your awakening. You see how every person who has entered your life, even those who caused you pain, has been a teacher. You see how every challenge you've faced has been an opportunity for growth,